targeting civilians, bombing infrastructure, cutting off food and water, taking children as hostages. It seems like the brutality of the tactics in the Israel-Palestine conflict are limitless. But how do you get to this point where the two sides wage a war with almost no rules? I'm Paul, a U.S. Army combat veteran. I served a combat tour in Afghanistan, and so I have a little bit of insight into this type of warfare, especially in the Islamic world. So we're going to talk a little bit about this and hopefully give you some insights into the incentives, why both sides behave the way that they do. Okay, let's talk about, first off, overall. You can see here that Israel is a state, in the Middle East, not to make things, not to sound dumb. But you can see here, right, there's fighting in a number of areas. First off, in this Gaza Strip, a small chunk of land here abutting the Mediterranean, as well as in the Syria adjacent side of Israel. But you can see that this fighting has been pretty pervasive throughout the conflict and throughout the Israeli state. And obviously, we have seen both sides. It's actually fairly rare to see that these forces are engaging each other in what we would think of as force-on-force battles. There's oftentimes, you can see here, shootings at checkpoints. These are usually Israeli manned areas. But Israeli settlers, these are civilians opening fire on residents. Warplanes conducting strikes against dense urban areas, and the list just goes on and on and on. Israeli commandos conducting operations in and around the areas of Palestine. There's a huge range of tactics, a huge range of targets. Now, here's the thing you have to understand is that I want to draw a philosophical distinction here. On one side, you have the morality, right? Is it right to target civilians in war? I believe not, right? And I was a combatant in a conflict, and I didn't target civilians. But this is not a video about morality. You believe whatever side is right or that both sides are wrong, it doesn't matter. This is not what this is about. The question is, how do human beings, groups of human beings, get to this point where they look at these tactics and say, these are acceptable tactics? That is the conversation we're having here. So don't at me in the comments, but be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of analysis. Right? If you enjoy analysis that isn't all hype and getting worked up and black on white Instagram screenshot text, but a real conversation about the real details, then hit subscribe. Because that's what this channel is entirely. Okay. So let's talk about both sides. You have to understand the numbers first. Now, the Al-Qassam brigades, this is the armed wing of Hamas. Now, who is Hamas, right? Hamas is, really think of it as three things. It calls itself an Islamic resistance movement, and it is focused on the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian territories, which encompasses, I believe, around a few million people. I think 7 to 9 million. And they have three main wings. The first is a religious education wing, operating schools, right? Think of them as, in the U.S., we have a lot of Catholic or Lutheran schools that educate children of all sorts of dispositions. And within the Palestinian Authority, the Hamas-run schools conduct a religious education function. They also have a humanitarian function. A large number of clinics, of social service programs are administered and funded by Hamas. Now, of course, the third wing, the one we're talking about most extensively, is the Al-Qassam brigades. This is the armed wing of Hamas. And I say armed wing because while Hamas is a political party, right, they win elections within Palestine, which is not quite a state, but has many state apparatus-like features. Hamas is a political party, right? It also has its own military. It's also a charitable organization, and it's a religious education organization. It's all of those things. So you see how within the Palestinian territories, almost all there's lots of different venues by which someone can encounter Hamas. They're not going to be like the Taliban, who are focused on ruling and imposing their vision of Sharia law, oftentimes with a substantial measure of cruelty, right? Hamas has a lot of different things. It's hard to argue with someone giving out food to the poor. That's almost ontologically good. And so you see how right away Hamas is already something that's going to be a little more complicated than just a regular standard run-of-the-mill terror organization. Now, the other thing to remember is the size of the armed wing. Their entire armed wing is between 15,000 and 40,000 armed militants. Again, they're supported by Iran, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and Hezbollah, a very similar organization that operates in Lebanon. But Hezbollah is probably, I think, around 10 times the size. So Hamas is like, think of Hamas as Hezbollah's little brother that wants to do everything Hezbollah does, but just scales it down. Okay, but keep these numbers in mind. 40,000 total fighters on the high end of the estimation. Now we pivot over to the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF. The Israeli Defense Forces were established basically concurrently with the state of Israel, and Israel has fought several wars against not just Hamas and other irregular organizations, but they fought throughout their history a lot of wars against states. They fought Egypt like 3 times. They fought Syria. They sometimes fought coalitions of Arab states against one another, emerging victorious every time, oftentimes seizing large chunks of territory from these countries that attacked them. Now, in order to ensure that Israel is ready for that sort of situation and to deter further aggression, they have a mandatory conscription program. That means that conscripts serve between 2 and 3 years. Males age 17 to 49 are considered is the total available for military service population. Military men with, unless you have an exception, medical or religious, you will serve for 2 years at 17. And they have around 169,000 active personnel with around 500,000 reservists. And their reservists are very active, very much ready, and expect to be called up frequently in the event of a crisis like this. The total defense budget is the 15th largest defense budget in the world, taking up 5% of Israel's GDP, $24.3 billion, including, of course, a large number of domestic military manufacturers and suppliers, in addition to a bunch of foreign allies who provide them with gear. And you can see here just the scale of operations since the state's founding in 1948. Just easily, probably around 24 different combat operations. So you see, there's a scale problem right away. Hamas here, a armed wing of a political party, is going up against a $25 billion, against the 15th largest military in the entire world. So right there, you have a math problem that explains in part why Hamas has to pivot to the tactics it does. Hamas, right, if you're going to fight, you want to fight in ways that are effective, that achieve the political effects that you desire. But here's where things get kind of complicated. What exactly does Hamas want? The answer is pretty complicated. The political party of Hamas inherently argues that it has an obligation to conduct, a religious obligation, to conduct a jihad against Israel, to liberate the Palestinian territories, at least. They are deliberately vague about their support for a 2-state solution. Over time, they've kind of tried to thread the needle because they have come to the realization that having an official stance of, killing every Jew is an unpopular stance in the international community. So to garner more international support, it seems like they have softened their stance. They may have also just come to the realization that it's messed up. But the idea is that Hamas believes it has a mandate to fight with violence, right? Not with political agitation, to fight against or for the liberation of Palestine, what they believe is Palestine. And so when you have this mandate, you have to fight, right? Otherwise, imagine if you had a political party who was like, we have one objective, and it's to increase the income tax on billionaires. And then when they got power, they didn't actually try to increase the billionaires tax, right? How long would they stay? How long would they win elections? How long would people support them? Not that long. So they have a mandate that says, we are going to fight for your liberation. When they take power, they have to do it, or else they will look like frauds. And that's the first problem they run into. How do you fight against something that big and powerful? Here's what you don't do. You don't target them where they're strong, right? If you go after Israeli bases, for example, military bases, you know that they will be able to call in air power. They'll be able to call in reinforcements, tanks. They're highly trained. And while we've seen some footage from this of some Israeli military bases being raided or taken, in general, this is a bad idea, right? Sort of like the Taliban, right? They would rarely fight us one-on-one or with organized troops, ambushes and the like. They always tried to skew the tactics in a way that we were never able to bring the full brunt of U.S. high-tech modern military power to bear. And Hamas is stuck in the same situation. They cannot go toe-to-toe with even a fraction of the IDF. And so how do you maintain your mandate to fight when you have no ability to actually win on a military perspective? The answer is you have to look at ways to deal blows to the enemy, right, without necessarily risk, where the risk reward is worth it. And the answer, sadly, oftentimes is civilians, by targeting civilian infrastructure, civilian events, or very, very, very low security parts, like a police checkpoint or a government building, right? Those facilities, those soft targets, is the military parlance for them, are much, much easier and lower risk. So in some ways, Hamas has no choice but to, if they want to fight, and they have to fight or else the support will go towards someone else, they have to not totally waste their people, which is also will make you look even worse if you look like you're fighting, but you're just losing. You have no choice, right? You have to find these tactics that'll work. Indiscriminate rockets, targeting bombings. There's all sorts of sort of underhanded tactics, right? It's called asymmetric warfare. And the asymmetry, as you guys can see, is 24 billion, against a 600,000 strong army against 400,000 people who are just like a political party member. So you see sort of the asymmetry here. And so you have to adopt what's called asymmetric tactics. But that doesn't explain why Israel is so grueling in response. They are so punishing. And to understand that, we have to get a little deeper. Now, you've got to realize that there has been a lot of work by the international community to try to resolve this issue. It's kind of, for the international community, it's become kind of a bellwether. Is peace possible, right? Is it possible for two very different people groups to coordinate, collaborate, and achieve a level of peace? right? That's sort of a core thesis of democracies, is that people with different ideas can find ways to coexist. And the idea of democracies everywhere is that this can work. So when it fails in Israel-Palestine, it sends kind of a message throughout the rest of the world, especially in countries that have emerging democracies or fragile democracies, that every time they see this, they say, look, if all the effort and all the time and all the money of the international community cannot get these two to play nice, even a little nice, what hope is there for, the opposition party in my country? And so it's important, right, to establish this peace program. And so there's a lot of research that goes into Israeli attitudes. But remember, Israel is not like a low religion Western modern democracy, right? It's democratic. It has a large cosmopolitan, very westernized set of people. But like a lot of countries, there is a subset of the Israeli voting public who hold strong religious views. And you have to, if you are a democracy, you cannot win an election without some level of catering to these beliefs. And that's where things get really tough, right? Because there's lots of solutions out there, but ultimately, when you look at the opinions of the man on the street, so to speak, the overwhelming number of Israeli Jews, 84%, and 6 in 10 Palestinians believe there's no one on the other side who actually wants peace. They're just manipulators biding their time to commit more violence against them. And frankly, if you believe this, the instances the last week has shown basically that you're correct, that Hamas, whenever they negotiated, they were just preparing for this large-scale wave of attacks, and that Palestinians likewise say, oh, the Israelis are obviously just waiting for a chance to attack us or to respond to our attacks out of proportion. Only 17% of Palestinians believe that most Israeli Jews have peaceful intentions. So that means almost 83% of Palestinians believe that the average Israeli Jew wants to hurt them, wants to hurt Palestinians. And this is a massive shift, right? Almost half of Palestinians believed that the average Israeli Jew had peaceful intentions just 6 years ago. And so this is a continuation of an existing trend, right? Only 12% of Israeli Jews believe Palestinians are mostly peaceful or have peaceful intention. So again, 82% of Israeli Jews say the average Palestinian has nefarious intentions. And this also reflects a hardening of opinions, right? 33% of Jews and 35% of Jews in 2018 believed that Palestinians had intended on reaching a peace accord. And the largest most people on both sides believe that the other side wants to wage armed struggle against the other. And of course, 82% of Jews and 75% of Palestinians think the other side will never accept the existence of an independent state. So you have to place things into those contexts. You combine this belief that the other side is only running a scheme, that they only want violence, and that they cannot be trusted, and that they would never, ever accept your existence. You combine that with a strong religious mandate, right? For example, most majorities of both believe the entirety of Israel and Palestine belongs to their group. 93% find that the entire land between the Mediterranean and Jordan River belongs to each other, the whole thing. And under both of these sides believe so with religious fervor. Again, imagine it's hard for a secular democracy, people who live in secular democracies, to understand what it means to have a religious mandate. Imagine if you believed that Israel was from the Mediterranean to the Jordan, and that was as universally true, mandated by the divine, as true as 2 + 2 = 4. And again, 93% of each side believe that the existence of the other person is a literal affront to God's will. Now you may be thinking, as a secular person, you may be like, hey, how could we as human beings defy God's will at all, right? Like, in what parallel universe can a few million Palestinians or a few million Jews thwart the will of the divine? Again, I'm not going to pretend to understand this level of theological argument. But what you do need to understand is that there is a belief that the other side is irredeemably evil. Again, if you imagine believing that the other side operates against the fundamental truth of the world. And this is probably my favorite meme. It says, how I wake up knowing my enemies are ontologically evil and there is no act against them, which is wrong. Ontologically evil would be like, they're not human beings, they are evil incarnate. So therefore, anything you do against evil is inherently good, or at least not wrong. You cannot, for example, there's no such thing as I'm trying to think, in the real world, maybe something like a cancer, right? A disease that is only a scourge on humanity that offers no benefits. To say like, is there such a thing as torturing cancer? No, of course not. Anything you do to deter or stop it is a good thing, right? Is there such a thing, or people are like, guys, like bot flies or some brutal parasite. People are like, do the botflies, is it right of us to eliminate them as a species? And it's just like, of course not. They're ontologically evil. They exist only to harm human beings. The problem is that on each side, the public increasingly believes that the other side has more in common with things like the malaria parasite than they do with human beings with feelings and flesh and blood. And this is something that is just a function of, you don't wake up one day and adopt this belief that there's flesh and blood human beings that differ from me in some ways, but they are inherently evil and their existence is thwarts the will of the divine. And once you but you get to that belief primarily through two things: indoctrination, which, as we talked about, Hamas does, but so does Israel, right? They are not a secular state as we understand them. They're a deeply, deeply religious state as well. And so you indoctrinate someone with a religious ideology that maintains that divine mandate, you're going to end up, with an electorate that votes that way. But you also have the history. And when you look at this phase of the conflict, you understand how you can get there. Every family that lost someone in that attack on the music festival, or that had someone who was killed in an airstrike on downtown Gaza, they are going to become hardened. This belief that is pervasive in their societies is going to calcify and harden to be a universal truth. And it certainly feels that way when you look at civilians being targeted. And once you have this calcified belief that it's okay to do anything you do to harm the other side is good because the other side is evil and harming them is therefore a moral mandate. Once you adopt that belief and you align your political views around it, all bets are off. This is not I saw the exact same thing in tribal wars in Afghanistan, the sectarian violence in Iraq, super common. All of these things combine. If you want to produce frightening levels of human violence, this is what you have to do. You've got to target them as the outgroup. You have to convince them that their very existence, the existence of the other side, is actually an affront to the universe or to the very nature of goodness itself. And you have to believe that they themselves are violent and committed to your destruction, and that they do not have to prove to you that they are hostile, right? That they are hostile by virtue of existing. Once you adopt those beliefs, it becomes extremely morally easy to commit heinous acts against people. This is how you end up saying, okay, you attacked us. We are going to bomb the downtown of your capital city and make no effort at all to try to reduce civilian casualties. In fact, civilian casualties are kind of the point. And that's how you end up saying, you know what? Instead of targeting your military, we're going to target a bunch of civilian concert goers. That's what we're going to do. So anyway, guys, I hope this gives you a little bit of insight and actual analysis of why things are the way they are. If you're interested in seeing analysis of some of the combat footage, not the worst of the worst, I don't do that, but the footage of many of the operations, we get insights we can't get anywhere else. And those are going to be on combatvetnews.com. This is my premium site. YouTube has cracked down heavily on combat analysis. And so when I do like GoPro footage from Ukraine or from Israel, it's going to be on Combat Vet News. And so any one of these tiers gets you access. It also supports what I do here as an independent analyst. So if you're interested, go check us out at combatvetnews.com. And thank you guys, as always, for listening and your support. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Cheers.